The start decks introduced to us for all the new nations going to Divine Z have been out for about a month now, and having the opportunity to play all these decks, I'm ready to showcase you guys the list I've curated for all of them. Now I'm going to showcase them from what I think are the worst decks to the best decks and how I got to this point with them. Now we're going to head over to camera 2 and get this video started, but before we do that, you already know what's coming next. If you enjoy seeing content like this, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Do not forget to hit the notification bell so you are always updated on my newest videos coming out. To start off this list, we're going to be taking a look at Dragon Empire's Triumph Dragon and what we've created within 1 month. Now, Triumph Dragon was the Divine Z start deck base monster featuring the effect to gain 5,000 power plus 1 critical and retire a unit. And like all of his other successors and predecessors that came in the same set, they all share the same ability of being able to counterblast 1 and search the deck out for themselves. Now, Triumph Dragon is one of the Vanguards that came out within these sets that did not gain a multi-attack effect. He gained an extra critical in their place. And with his new grade 3 support, Straight Dragon, being added into the deck, it's a rear guard that, unlike the others, did not fix the issue of the multi-attack but gained a critical instead. While playing Triumph Dragon, I had to focus on the deck's strengths and weaknesses, and for strengths, obviously the persona writing is good. The generic support for Dragon Empire for this deck, especially with the new promo Shenri, was actually really helpful in terms of building. You get extra draw power and soul, which will matter for some of our other effects. We have the new grade 3 Straight Dragon, which was a draw extender and critical finisher for late game, as well as other things to make this deck work. Cards I really had to focus on were definitely the normal order support, the grade 2 draw support for this deck, as well as the generic support Baxter, the grade 2, and for resource management, Gojo. In this deck, there is a lot of counterblasting going on, and unfortunately Dragon Empire did not have the best counter charge to go into. Therefore, I had to look something to actually work with the deck, and when it came to looking at support, I thought Gojo was the best option. The grade 2 unit that lets you countercharge 1 and draw a card when your Vanguard's attack hits was also a good option as well, but there was nowhere for me to put it because I wanted other things like Straight Dragon or Baxter in the front or Latifah to make things just work out better. The winning image of this deck is Beatdown. You want to use the effects of your Latifah, your Baxter, your boosters from the grade 1 units to put them down in the early game and just start hitting your opponent as soon as you can. If you could push them up to 3 damage by the time you go into grade 3, you're in a good position because your Vanguard will always be swinging critical, and in the late game when your Straight Dragon gains a critical via its own effect by soul blasting out the Triumph Dragon you've continuously persona ride on, you'll have 2 attacks every single turn for at least 2 turns that are going critical at your opponent at really high numbers. Latifah, beat up Draco Kid, gain power, so does Shenri, she gains power. Baxter has an effect that prevents him from being hit against your opponent's attacks, as well as gives 5,000 power to itself and the Vanguard, making that Triumph Dragon attack a lot better. We are focusing on with triggers, criticals, and draws because we need to see into certain pieces. If we want to make sure all of our attacks are as scary as possible, we only have 3 attacks here, so the best route to go is get more power and more crit. It's the only thing that's going to really work for Triumph Dragon. Triumph Dragon is at the bottom of this list because compared to everything else, Dragon Empire just doesn't have the support to make this deck work. I think that from my experience with it, Latifah and Beat Up Draco Kid were definitely the cards needed to push this deck to the next level. Everything else is pretty much generic. You need the draws from Shenri as well as the grade 2 Ride Cycler. You can't play the Energy Blast one, which I think is honestly a lot better than this one for this deck, but you can't play it. You don't have the energy effect. The ride line is also really bad. I don't understand the purpose of the ride line. The grade 1 uses energy, but the grade 2 gets you back the energy, but if you go second, you can use the grade 2's effect to get a body onto the board, but 9 times out of 10, you'll usually want something better, so you might as well just get the energy. The ride line was bad. I didn't want to play anything else. You don't have the CB space to even incorporate the Dragonic Overlord ride line just to get the bar effect off to get a grade 1 specifically, and I thought the Boss Saga ride line was cool, but I do like the Ride Cycler in the deck still, and you can have a soul issue depending on what your turn orders look like, and it just wasn't worth it to me. For our second list, we have Brandt Gates Astrum. Astrum was really surprising to me because I did a poll a long time ago asking you guys who you thought was the best start deck, and a lot of people thought that Brandt Gates Astrum was going to be that. However, unfortunately, in real-time playtesting, this was not the case. Astrum is an extremely expensive deck, very linear in play, and despite it being very linear in play, the support from Brandt Gate to make it work and its expensive cost, unfortunately just collapsed this deck into oblivion. What makes it better than Triumph Dragon is that it does have the multi-attack, your Vanguard has the Persona-Ride Search, and your numbers are actually really good in the late game. Because of how the order works, as well as the effect of the other cards you play in the deck, you do make really good numbers once you hit grade 3, your set orders are set up for your Vanguard's effect to get the restand from Astrum, as well as additional power from the order and the effects of the rear guards themselves, but this deck has no early game. And in the early game, as of right now in this current format, it is really important that you can at least do something. And outside of throwing a booster behind the Vanguard to, pressure the Vanguard attack, this deck does not pop off until turn 3, so for 2 turns, you're extremely vulnerable. On top of that, unlike all of the other Vanguard-specific order supports, this order does not counterblast 1 and draw you a card. I went to go look at everything else, and everything else that is specific either to counterblast 1, gives you a unique effect to replenish the card that was called placed in set order, or at least do something like benefit your resources heavily. This does not do that. This order is a counterblast 1 to get active, and it's a grade 2, so you can't start setting up until grade 2, and you really want like at least 2 or 3 active, or all 4, which is the goal in this deck, but you don't get to draw 1, which means that you have a card going out from your hand that you can't replenish back, which definitely does hurt your resource management, which affect your trigger lineup, so we had to play crits and draws to keep our hand up. We have to play the habitable zone to do that. It just wasn't that good, and because of the heavy counterblasting, we're locked into playing certain support to make sure that our resources are good. We're playing 3 Bubble Mine as 3 of the monster. I had to make sure I had as many ways as possible to countercharge to make sure that I can use the effect of my Astrum return to get the Persona, keep activating my orders, use the effect of the new grade 3 support Swing by Dragon, which gives this deck 5 attacks, which is really good in the late game, as well as my Combine Rusher and my Habitable Zone when I need them later in the game. A couple of techs I've added into this deck. I'm playing 1 copy of the Laundry or the Cleaning Swiss Sisters order. This order gives 2k to your entire front row. I'm playing this literally just because it's free. The other option I was thinking about playing was the order for the Shadow World or the Dark World, the one that lets you Soul Blast 1, draw a card. I thought that was cool. The other one to get the Shadow Army token, I thought that was cool. But then I thought about it, I was like, if I have another copy of the order in my hand that's a CV that I'll get for free, but then I have to do it again. So I figured why not just play the grade 1 order and get that set up. It does help you in the early game a bit because it makes those grade 1 units that you have in your hand, convert them into like 10k attackers, and it gives a little extra push to all of your numbers that might be in the odd category and things like that might just be hitting a little low. It's a little push to the front row, but I play it really because it's free. You can honestly play anything else instead. I think that Astrum has a lot of room to grow, but as of right now, it's definitely not the strongest of all the start decks. Whew, that was a mouthful. Now I know I've said a lot of bad things about this deck, but the good things that it does have is it is a 5 attack deck, it makes great numbers in the late game, and your Vanguard's effect is easy to do. Therefore, with the 4 attacks you have, you can do really pressuring things. You're going to have 2 really big attacks your opponent has to deal with. I know that a lot of people over the grade 2 dragon that I'm playing play the robot that gains 10k when you choose 2 orders. My only problem with that is the fact that at that point you're playing so much non-shielding cards that it makes your early game even worse because you already have a bad early game. So I'm not gonna be able to block in the early game and I can't push in the early game. To me, it wasn't worth it. But if you want to split the 2 up, you can. I just felt like having another beater was important. So you can definitely cut the dragon out, like 2 of them, and then play 2 copies of that grade 3. They can definitely try that. That's up to you personally. For our 3rd deck, and honestly one of my favorites out of all the set, we have Osa Largus. Now Osa Largus I have discussed on the channel. I will leave the video for that in the description up here, as well as in the link description below. But Osa Largus essentially is another multi-attacking deck for this, and because it's Dark States, we have a couple of unique effects to go into. Now, ride line wise, I've kept it the same. I actually really do like this ride line. It gives you the extra soul as well as the draw that you need to keep up with the other decks. You still are playing Lamina, you're playing Falcratia. I'm still playing my grade 3 tech, which is the one that lets you, when called out from soul via card ability, counterblast 1, get 10k. Your opponent can't guard with sentinels. If you're paying attention to your triggers as well as your soul and your other resources, and your opponent's at 5 damage, this card can become the finishing card that you need to help close out the game, especially if they have a huge hand, defensively speaking. It's a really good card to try. The newest addition in this deck, however, is the Order line. Now, the Order line in this deck, I put in over the original support that I had, which was the Osa Largus key support. And the main reason being is because this deck needs a full board to pop off. And on top of that, you need the additional power from those cards. The grade 2 that Osa Larges came with, yes, it lets you move something into the soul to clear out the front row, to get another attacker going on, and draw you a card for it, but it didn't make good numbers. And unfortunately, right now, in this current metagame, if you want to play this deck at its best level, you need cards that just make numbers. The grade 1 unit that lets you search out the order becomes a 13k booster or attacker when you activate an order for the turn. The order gives you a soul charge, which will power up our Brainwash Swirler, and then give 5k to another unit, so that makes better numbers on its own. Also, Orions, she has a good number. Falcratia makes good numbers, and they're not really as soul blasting in the worst way for this deck. I obviously took out Guggenrom from the last list to make place of Orions because they essentially do the same thing. Orions just does it better. And I just upped Brainwash Swirler. I think I maxed out at 3 now. I put in Falcate still in the deck. Zargon was cool, but I felt like Falcate guarantees me getting the soul charge, and sometimes I need specific targets. Same thing with Falcratia. I maxed her out because she makes really good numbers, and once again, she also puts specific things into the soul. Lineup wise for triggers, it's still the same. 8 crit, 3 draw, 4 heal. You really need the draws, especially in this deck, because you need to look for certain pieces. Dark States OT, nothing really to say there. 2 copies of the Cat for the counter charge. Pretty much very similar to the Osa Larges list I showcased a couple of weeks ago, but the key difference here is that the order ride line definitely has helped the power issue in this deck while out losing any of the card advantage stuff that we got from Guggenrom and the grade 2 that I took out prior. Now for the 4th list, we actually have a deck that was really surprising to me, which is Cristianos. Now, I've discussed my disgust for Cristianos in the past. I felt like for a Stoicheia Aqua Force looking Vanguard, it should have been a multi-attack deck that like maybe lets you swap a column or something. That's what I originally thought it was going to be, but that wasn't the case at all. It ended up just being a mill 2, call 2 from drop, but has actually been doing really well. The list for this deck is extremely linear. I've honestly, not gonna lie, I took in an accumulation of different lists when building mine, and this was the best list I came out to. That's actually working out pretty well. Now, Cristianos, the goal of this deck is that you want to accumulate more than 15 cards into the drop zone to activate the Nectar of Sensationalism order. This way, your unit will receive a huge amount of power as well as a critical, and you get to use the new Severin grade 3, which will have the multi-attack on it, and swing 2 attacks with a crit on them at your opponent. Now, I will admit that this list is inspired by a lot of other things. Cristianos is probably the deck I playtested the most. I playtested it for a week. My biggest inspirations for this deck was the Commander Jaime list, which I'll go ahead and also leave down in the link in the description below, because there are a couple of changes I made to my Cristianos watching that, which I'll talk about later. And then obviously other Japanese lists and what they were trying. Now for the 2nd list, which is Marlene. Now, Marlene is really interesting. I know that a lot of people don't really know where this deck stands, but it has been doing really well like on a Japanese local level, and I actually think that this is like definitely one of the stronger decks to play from the start decks. I just think that a lot of people haven't trying it out because Lyrical Monasterio is mad expensive right now. Do not drop the $100 or like $150 or $200 to build this deck. It's not worth it. I just think that Marlene is up there because the generic support of Lyrical Monasterio is so strong that all of the flaws she would have as an individual card have just been taken over by the generic supported deck itself. Now, in terms of the way I'm choosing to play this deck, I went the 5 attack route. It is using the grade 2 Floretti and her ability to call a grade 3 from your hand and draw a card. This way, you have Marlene doing 5 attacks. There's a budget version of doing this deck as well, but I just like this variation. You can draw cards, build back up your soul. You have an early game, you get power, you get to bounce stuff back, so your control matchups aren't as bad. You might have like 1 card on the board or something left, but that's still good. You have the Wallista ride line in this deck, but the Marlene ride line was good too. This deck's generic support and all the options you can do with it are just so strong that I really do feel like out of all the start decks compared to everything I've talked about, this is definitely one of those decks that if you have the money to make this deck work, or you already possess the pieces to make it work, you can go for it and it's just going to be good. Like, there's not a single bad card in here or like anything really wrong with this deck other than the fact that it does have a CB issue from my experience. Your Floretti costs CB, Marlene costs CB if you want that Persona search. Your Varshabon CB, Strega CB, the grade 1 search out the order CB. Like, all of your cards cost counterblast and you don't have any form of counter charge in this deck. So you have to be very specific about the effects that you're using, because if you make a mistake, you can lose out on the 5 attacks. You'll still always have 4 if you're managing your energy right. But if you want to maximize 5 attacks in this deck, you have to be very close attention to your CB because there's no counter charge outside of healing. However, when she is working properly, 5 attacks, good power, good draw, just a really solid deck overall. And the start deck that takes the #1 slot, and I think at this point we all know who I'm talking about, is Keter Sanctuary Vesio. Now, Vesio is in the #1 slot for me, not just because of what it does, but because the generic support for Keter Sanctuary within the newest set, as well as the future sets and what we have now, is so strong. The compression of this deck, the early game, the speed, the hand size of Vesio is insane. Like, Saragon as a card is so good. This card can become a 13k booster for as long as you want it until you decide to use the effect to add a card to your hand, keep your hand size up. Spiral Cutie's Persona Ride effect, which you're guaranteed to get in this deck because using Vanguard's ability, is really good. I just discovered the Grade 2 Regalia piece, draw 2 cards with the T-Fault combo, so now you have drawing your hand, Superior Calling, like really strong. And then you have obviously other cards for resource management issues to fixate where this deck goes wrong at. Honestly, it's really just Soul, not so much CB, because some of the counterblast effects you can choose to like not use in others. But I digress. This deck's consistency is insane. Draw power is insane. Early game is insane. Attacks are insane. It is a weaker version of Resvael, which I definitely do think is the strongest Keter deck at the moment right now. But if you don't have the money to play that, but you had all the generic support prior and you want to get that still feel of Resvael, this is a really good route to go. It's extremely consistent, and there's honestly no flaws to this deck other than just you paying attention to your resources, because obviously you don't have any counter charge in this deck. And, you know, if you could incorporate into it, like you can obviously take out Sajas and put in 2 copies of Turner. You can reduce the Ilier and put 3 copies of Turner if you really want it. There's routes to go in this deck to mitigate that issue. But once again, that just proves how strong this deck is, because you have a route to fix the issue without losing everything that's making this deck really good right now. Now, that's been my take after playing these decks for 1 month, guys. Definitely let me know how you guys feel about your start decks after playing them for about a month now. As of today, we'll be going into June tomorrow, so I really have been like behind the scenes working on these decks and trying to get the best variation I can. Now, with that being said, card fighters, thank you so much for staying tuned throughout the entirety of this video. I'll catch you later. Peace.